Hanging out, and they've got this idea of environmentalism. Now let's talk about where environmentalism comes from, because some things that really shouldn't have to be stated, we can just say them. Is it good to have clean water? Yes, it's very nice. You're able to swim in a river and not get a disease, of course. Is it good to have air that you can breathe without having bad health effects? Of course, that is a good thing. And pollution should be addressed. The air in major cities in China is dirty. That should be cleaned up. That's not what modern environmentalism is about. Those things, of course, make sense. Environmentalism was created by the British as an attack against humanity. The World Wildlife Fund, for example, or the Worldwide Fund for Nature, this was founded in the late 60s by Prince Philip, the old crusty thing that's married to the Queen, by the Nazi Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, the Nazi, not exaggerating, and Sir Julian Huxley. This was created as a British project at the same time that colonialism was being defeated and overthrown around the world in the 1960s, particularly by the late 1960s, in order to prevent the growth of those colonies. Environmentalism came on the scene. So countries now are told, oh, you'd like to develop, you'd like to get out of poverty, you'd like to provide energy for your people? Well, I'm sorry, but you cannot build a coal power plant because it would be bad for CO2 emissions. You're just going to have to die. That's the friendly face of environmentalism today, and it was created in that way. 1989. Let's jump ahead a little bit to talk about some stuff about global warming or climate change or whatever, climate catastrophe, climate chaos, whatever words people want to use for this today, or maybe next month it'll be different. Here's Stephen Schneider. And here's something he pointed out in Discover in 1989. On the one hand, he wrote, as scientists, we are ethically bound to the scientific method, in effect, promising to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. On the other hand, we are not just scientists, but human beings as well. We need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination. That, of course, entails getting loads of media coverage. So we have to offer up scary scenarios. We have to make simplified, dramatic statements and make little mention of any doubts we might have. This double ethical bind we find ourselves in cannot be solved by any formula. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. Have you ever known somebody, or perhaps yourself, when you have got in mind the way things ought to be, that you've said something that you knew not to be true to try to make a case for something that you think is very big and important, and you may have fibbed along the way because you believe that final goal is really important? This happens pretty frequently. Okay, this is what this guy is mentioning. So let's take a look at some of the claims that we're hearing more recently about the climate and about the catastrophe supposedly upon us. Here's Mustafa Talba, the executive director of the UN Environmental Program. He says the world faces an ecological disaster as final as nuclear war unless governments act now. Without action, the future will bring, by the turn of the century, an environmental catastrophe which will witness devastation as complete, as irreversible as any nuclear holocaust. Did anybody remember hearing him make this remark on May 11th? It wasn't in the news. It was because it was 1982. 1982, okay. By the turn of the century, an environmental catastrophe which will witness devastation as complete, as irreversible as any nuclear holocaust. Maybe he was just a little bit off, though. I'm sorry. Here's Noel Brown, the New York director of the UN Environmental Program. A senior UN environmental official says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if the global warming trend is not reversed within 12 years. Coastal flooding and crop failures would create an exodus of eco-refugees, threatening political chaos. 12 years. People remember hearing about this recently? Kind of a famous wild lady around here said this, I believe. Well, she's a little late on the scene because this guy said we had 12 years in 89, okay? I think you can kind of guess what's going to be coming up with these next slides. So I just put the year up there. If there's no action before 2012, we're too late, he said in 2007. I guess it's just too late, isn't it? Here we have our magic 8-ball, Prince Charles. He says in March of 2009, we have less than 100 months to alter our behavior before we risk catastrophic climate change. We may yet be able to prevail and thereby avoid bequeathing a poisoned chalice to our children and grandchildren. But we only have 100 months to act. Now, some people would say that a man who plays dress-up and takes pictures like this as an adult without feeling embarrassed about himself and who lives in several castles would be out of touch with the population. But he's got his pulse. He's got his finger on the pulse of the people. That's why he used the easy-to-relate-to image of having a chalice, which we all have at home, and of bequeathing it. Does anyone in this room have enough money to bequeath things to the next? I mean, you got to have a lot of money to bequeath, okay? So 100 months. We had our math quiz here. 100 months from March 2009. When does that?
8 years.
8 years and a few months, right? So that would be 20. So that already happened. Oh no. We have the poison chalice. It's too late. Let's shake him up and see what he says the next time. The grim reality is that our planet has reached a point of crisis, and we have only 7 years before we lose the levers of control. Okay, let's shake him up and see what comes up in 2010. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have only 86 months left before we reach the tipping point. 2014, we are running out of time. How many times have I found myself saying this over recent years? Why is nobody listening to me? His Royal Highness warns that we have just 35 years to save the planet from catastrophic climate change. And just this July, what did he say? Ladies and gentlemen, I am firmly of the view that the next 18 months will decide our ability to keep climate change to survivable levels and to restore nature to the equilibrium we need for our survival. Where are these numbers coming from? Okay. Now, you might say this is just Prince Charles. Who is he? Well, yeah. This isn't out of the ordinary here. So what we've got is, it's just ridiculous. I actually had some slides I was going to go through about this, but I'm just not even really going to, it's just not worth it. Look, here's supposedly what temperatures, would, so here we are, 2019 or whatever. This chart was made, I'm sorry, a few years back, but you can see where the supposed temperature is versus all the, the supposed temperature versus what it really is. These people have been making these predictions for years, and it just hasn't been happening, okay? In 1999, the temperature in the US was presented as moving along this curve. In 2006, the same data was presented as looking like this. So, although there was a decrease in temperature by the year 2000, as printed in 1999, when the same data was printed in 2006, they said the temperature actually increased. So there is man-made global warming. You see it right here, right here. You just go in Excel and you make it. It's no problem. It's very easy. So this climate stuff is it's a suicide cult. It takes all these images. One of the things about to build up these movements like this, where you get people to glue themselves or pretend to glue themselves to things and put on fake spray paint. It's spray on chalk. That wasn't spray paint, so they want to look good, but they don't want a big prison sentence. So if it's spray on chalk, you get out in a couple days. Very smart of them. Is to present everything as a simple good or bad. So instead of talking about understanding of the world climate, it becomes as simple as, do you believe in it or not? Almost like someone saying, a kid asking another one on the way to school, do you believe in Santa Claus or not? Or somebody perhaps asking themselves if they believe in God or not. And so you get the simple thing, do you believe in global warming or not? Do you believe in climate change or not? This isn't a kind of a yes or no thing. You can believe that human beings have some impact on the world's climate, which I do. I mean, I couldn't imagine we have zero impact, duh. But the idea that it's a catastrophic thing, that we're going to lose the levers of control in some number of years, these are very specific claims. And so you shouldn't say whether you believe or not, yes or no, something that specific. and catastrophic. So let's talk instead about where we're going to go and what the wonderful future will be if we do not commit suicide. The reason, though, that this suicide is being pushed, I got to say, this is being very effective, actually, because that creepy girl, Greta, she's been having a lot of success in promoting her message. It's kind of amazing that a little schoolgirl on the street outside the Swedish parliament, some plucky heroine like this, is invited to the European Parliament, the French Parliament, the British Parliament. She's meeting with Angela Merkel. She's on her way, I believe she's on a sailboat now, coming to the US to offer us her wisdom. Why get picked up so easily? So what is happening is this is having a major effect specifically in Europe already, where there's major green policies, where Europe is aiming to outdo itself, country to country, to shut down CO2 emissions, to be climate neutral, and so on and so forth, to not allow investment in energy unless it's for a windmill or something like this. This is going to make it impossible to develop. Let's talk about what real development will look like. So in order to build a future, let's take just a moment to think about what makes human beings human beings. Here's a chart of human population growth. It ends at the year 2000. We've grown, of course, since then. As Dennis mentioned, unlike any other species, we're unlike any other species. No other species does this. If you had a chart of mammal population growth over evolutionary time, with the rise of mammals, you might see a rise like this. That could sure happen. If you had a chart of the amount of life on land, with the move from the seas to the land, you might see a chart like this over evolutionary time. But over a few thousand years, for one species, we're embodying as one humanity a principle that exists in the biosphere over millions of years, that exists in the universe over billions of years. Creative development. We make this happen because we figure out how nature works. Because guess what? We're not outsiders. There's something that our mind has in common with all of the universe that lets these things that we have called thoughts have a greater power than an earthquake or a volcano. Those thoughts, those things you carry around in your mind that don't even weigh anything, they're the most powerful thing we know of. Wow, that's the human species. I'm going to leave, this is a long quote. Well, I'm not going to introduce this man. I'm simply going to say his name and read this very appropriate quote. This is Vladimir Vernadsky. He wrote in the first half of the 1900s, "There exists now on the terrestrial surface a great geological force, perhaps cosmic. This force does not seem to be a new manifestation or special form of energy, nor yet a pure and simple expression of known energy. But it exerts a profound and powerful influence on the course of energetic phenomena on the Earth's surface, and consequently has repercussions, smaller but undeniable, beyond the surface, on the existence of the planet itself. This force is human reason, the directed and controlled will of social man." Let's use this thought in conjunction with the economic metric used by Lyndon LaRouche, energy flux density, to talk about what some of the conditions are going to have to be for our sustained growth and improvement. First, just a historical chart. The amount of energy used per person over the history of the United States. We used to use wood. We used to use, coal replaced wood. Oil and natural gas have supplanted coal. Fission, nuclear fission, got a little bit of a start, but then it really didn't. Energy use per person in the US peaked in the 1970s. This isn't because we invented fluorescent light bulbs. What do we not do that much of now compared to what we did in the 1970s that uses a lot of energy? Making things. Yes, that's a great way to save energy. Just shut down. Don't make anything. Hey, look at that. So what this reflects isn't efficiency. This reflects a decision to not be productive, to shift more and more towards finance instead of manufacturing or industry or advanced agriculture. Although, of course, we've had advancements in these things, but not as a major focus of the U.S. economy. Nuclear fusion is the next energy source for the future. In 1978, the Department of Energy worked out a blueprint for how different funding levels for nuclear fusion could help us achieve fusion by different years. Obviously, this is an estimate. And in 1978, this magenta line was an amount of funding that was estimated at that time to keep projects moving and keep research kind of going, but never really make the breakthrough. If Kennedy had said that we were going to the moon by the time the century was out, instead of by the time the decade was out, if we set our sights on a slow path to the moon, we might not have ever gotten there by 2000, if there wasn't an intent to really make it happen. So what we've had is nuclear fusion. The actual funding is that black line. Here's another chart. If we compare annual funding for a few different, and this is all adjusted for inflation and all that kind of thing. So the Apollo program, going to the moon, we can see here yearly $7 billion spent on this. The Manhattan Project, to develop an understanding of the nucleus in a race against the perceived threat of the Axis developing a nuclear bomb. Over $4 billion a year. Fusion. The highest cost estimate in 1978 was similar to what it cost to power the Manhattan Project. The level at which fusion would never be achieved is the gray bar, and the blue one all the way on the left. That's what we've actually been spending on average to research nuclear fusion. I want to put this in a little bit more perspective. Let's look at total funding. So again, we've got the Manhattan Project. It was quick. So it cost a lot, but it was done. Okay? We've got these different fusion crash programs, depending on how quickly we intended to make it, how rapid the investment was. Maybe $50 billion was the estimate in 1978 in today's dollars. The Apollo program cost maybe almost $100 billion. Let's look at one more. Oh. Let's zoom out. Okay. That's how much was spent last year on renewables in 1 year. 1 year. So compare that orange line. That was the total estimated cost to develop nuclear fusion energy. Compared to that orange total cost, the average cost, that tiny blue thing on the left is what we actually spend. So you barely even see it on this chart compared to renewables in 1 year. At this point, last year, more money was spent on renewable power sources than I don't really like the word, but energy sources called renewable compared to non-renewable. But the rate of power generation did not grow faster because they're very inefficient. Why is that? Because they've got a very low energy flux density. Windmills were excellent 600 years ago. Solar panels were great 1 billion years ago with photosynthesis. That's great. That technology exists. That's wonderful. Let the plants do it. They're very good at it. We do something plants don't do. Well, nuclear plants do it. We can figure out how the nucleus of the atom operates. This gives 1 million times more energy than any chemical reaction. There's no competition. This is a chart. Energy and GDP for different countries. Maybe GDP is not a good measure. Here's a chart. More energy going to the right, infant mortality going down. So when you say that maybe we don't need energy and we should live frugally, what you're saying is, maybe a few more babies will die. That doesn't matter. The important thing is we leave a good future for the next generation. Okay. So anyway, where can we go if we're developing? We can build a lot of projects. I'm going to wrap up here. Okay, a lot of big things to build. One irony here. This is the Grand Inga Dam, which would be built in the DRC. It would create enough power for literally tens, if not 100 million people. Well, presently 100 million people. As industry develops, maybe about 20 million people. Huge opportunity here. Financing was moving forward on it from the World Bank, which pulled out because of environmental concerns. Apparently people aren't part of the environment. What do we matter? So if we're going to transform the world at night, which is a great way to see where economic development is, what is going to make this transformation happen? Windmills? No. Nuclear fusion, the next technologies. Here's a simple schematic. On the left is natural gas, methane. The number at the bottom, 8 EV, 8 electron volts of energy in one molecule of natural gas. On the right, one fusion reaction. 3.5, 14 put it together, 17 MeV, million electron volts. 2 million times more energy in this fusion reaction than in the chemical reaction. Why would you spend money making windmills a little bit more efficient? So let's just talk about what we ought to do and what LaRouche's vision is on this, because I feel like I talked a lot about some negative things. So what is fusion going to do for us? It's going to let us have a mastery over space that today we could only even imagine or dream of. Right now, if you want to go to Mars, it takes 8 months, maybe 6 months if you get the orbits just right. If you take 8 months in space, does anyone remember seeing the footage of the astronaut where his twin was on the ground and the other Kelly brother was on the ISS for a year? Does anyone remember seeing what he looked like when he landed? How was he doing? Not that well. They had to carry him, huh? Okay. But would he have been doing well if he landed on Mars and had to set up a camp? Was he in a good position to do that? No. No. You send people like that to Mars, they're going to die. They're going to be jelly. So there's no reason to send people to Mars with chemical rockets. We just shouldn't bother doing it right now. It would be irresponsible. It's a death mission. It's just not going to work. If we don't develop nuclear fusion, we can send robots to Mars, of course, but no people. It's just death. It's stupid. What we can do then is, an asteroid's coming towards us, we could move it out of the way. With fusion, we could go to Mars in a week. Then you'd be in shape, you could take care, you could do things there, and you could actually come back if you had a problem, instead of waiting a year for the orbits to line up and then another 8 months to come back. That's not safe. We'll be able to power the next generations of industry. We'll be able to transform mining and materials. We'll be able to create steel without having to use coal anymore, which right now is used for its chemical properties. I'm not against using coal, but it's a little bit old-fashioned to still be using chemistry so much, when we could go to the more powerful realm of the nucleus. So, as LaRouche had proposed in the 80s, he said that if we adopted then a mission of developing industry on the moon as the basis for then going to Mars to set up scientific cities and all of this, that we should expect a rate of economic growth that in a generation, the economy would be 1,000 times bigger. Okay, a 10 times increase in economic productivity. It's hard to even imagine what that would mean. Imagine being able to get new clothes once a year compared to how at least most people in the US are able to get that more than once a year. Or imagine decreasing by a factor of 10 the age of the bus that you rode in, or the train that you rode in to get here, or the car that you rode in to get here. Imagine if houses were able to be produced at 1/10 the physical cost. I mean, just think about how much better life would be, how free we would be to be able to engage our minds in things besides trudging to work, doing a job that we might not even like at all, just to get money to pay bills to survive. What if we were advancing and going to other planets and able to be happy about what we were doing with our lives? So let me just read this short quote from LaRouche to wrap up, and then we'll go to discussion. In the existence of mortal mankind, he writes, over hundreds of generations before us, and perhaps hundreds to come, what gives meaning to this tiny speck, which is our own mortal existence? What mission might we perform with this so tiny thing, our mortal existence, that we might look upwards to the heavens and say to an unseen presence there, I am happy, because I know that what I am working to accomplish makes my mortal existence a necessary life in the whole space of hundreds of generations before mine and hundreds of generations still to come. Can there be a greater happiness than to live in such a way as to know that one's existence is efficiently justified by the mission to which one's mortal existence is contributing? Security and happiness in our immediate life are necessary conditions to the citizen, to which our Constitution's preamble dedicates the functions of our federal government. Yet, where could there be true individual happiness if all the meaning of our having lived were buried with our corpse? Do we not owe ourselves, our children, and humanity something better than individualistic, materialist gratifications? Is trudging to and from the securing of one's income enough, even if the material standard of life secured so is better than adequate? To what higher purpose do we trudge so? Must we not be contributing in some way to building something which is good for the future? That is the highest mission of government, of society, of us, to make sure that becomes the mission of the government. Do we ensure that increasingly, with the goal of everybody, the more people are able to live lives that they're able to knowingly reflect on and say, that was necessary, that was good, I left something better for the future, and I was able to live day to day knowing that I was participating in that? Isn't that better than a car? But we can have both, right? I mean, we will live well, but the greatest objective of adopting this space program is that we'll know that we're really doing something, that we're doing the human activity of discovering, of learning